Before I start, tell me where you're listening from. City, state, or country. I read every comment, and I still can't believe how far these stories travel. My name is Sloan Harper. I'm 27 years old, and at the time this happened, I was an active duty infantry specialist. I was still in uniform when my father decided my leg wasn't worth $5,000. The sound is what I remember first. A wet pop. Not loud, just wrong. Then heat flooded my knee, sharp and immediate, and the ground rushed up faster than my brain could keep up. I tried to stand out of instinct because soldiers always try to stand. My leg folded like it belonged to someone else. The training range was 2 hours from home. Dust in my mouth. My squad hovering while I pretended I was fine. By the time I reached the clinic, my knee had swollen so tight the fabric of my uniform strained against it. The provider didn't sugarcoat it. She tapped the scan with her pen and said, "You need surgery this week. If you wait, you're risking permanent impairment." Military approval could take weeks. I didn't have weeks. Off base, the upfront cost was $5,000. I made the call sitting on the edge of a plastic chair, my boot half unlaced, fingers shaking as adrenaline wore off. My mother sighed like I'd asked for a favor, not help. My sister laughed softly like this was a dramatic story she could retell later. My father sounded calm, almost gentle. "Sweetheart," he said, "we just bought the boat." This isn't a good time. Something inside me shut off. Not anger, not tears, just silence. The kind that feels permanent. 2 days later, I was on crutches in my apartment. Painkillers lined up on the counter, spreadsheets open on my laptop, running numbers that refused to work. Every option led to debt or delay, and delay meant losing the career I'd built my body around. That's when there was a knock on my door. My brother Beckett stood there in a grease-stained jacket from the mechanic shop, hands scarred and permanently oil dark. He looked at my legs, swore under his breath, and said, "They didn't help you." I shook my head. He didn't ask anything else. He pressed a wad of crumpled bills into my palm. $800, he said. "I sold my tools." I tried to argue. He was already turning away. That was the moment I understood exactly who my family was and who they weren't. I stood there long after the door closed. The metal handle still cold under my fingers. Beckett's money cutting into my palm like it weighed more than cash ever should. $800 wasn't enough to save my knee, but it was enough to remind me I wasn't invisible to everyone. That night, sleep came in broken pieces. Every time I drifted off, memories dragged me back awake. My parents writing checks for my sister's business ideas, no questions asked. My father handing me a notarized loan agreement with interest when my car died 3 years earlier. Same house, same parents, same bank account, different rules. By morning, the silence inside me had hardened into something functional. I called the loan office downtown, the kind with frosted windows and motivational posters that felt like threats. The air smelled like burnt coffee and desperation. The woman across the desk smiled too quickly as she slid papers toward me. Numbers. Stacked on numbers, fees, penalties, a future already chewed up and spit back. I signed anyway. Pain has a way of clarifying priorities. I didn't need comfort. I needed my leg. The surgery happened 48 hours later. White lights, cold hands, a mask lowering over my face while I stared at the ceiling and wondered how a boat had outranked my body. When I woke up, my knee was wrapped in bandages and metal, heavy and aching but still there. The surgeon leaned over me and said, "We got it in time." Relief hit so hard it made my chest hurt. 3 days later, the first loan payment posted. I had $47 left in my account. I stood in my kitchen, jacket still on, shaking as I emptied my pockets. Lip balm, a receipt from a gas station, and a crumpled lottery ticket I'd bought out of bitter habit while limping to the counter. More joke than hope. I scanned it once. Nothing registered. I scanned it again. Not a jackpot. Not a miracle. But enough. Enough to stop my hands from shaking. Enough to knock down the ugliest part of the loan. Enough to breathe without feeling like I was drowning. I told no one. Not Beckett. Not my parents. Silence had protected them for years. Now it was mine. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. I folded the ticket back into my wallet like it was contraband and paid what I could before anyone noticed the balance change. Relief is loud when it's shared. Quiet relief lasts longer. With my knee healing and my bank account no longer screaming, I started thinking the way I was trained to think, 2 steps ahead. Survival wasn't enough. I needed insulation, control, needed to make sure no one could ever decide my body was too expensive again. That's how I found the lawyer. His office sat on the 12th floor of a glass building downtown, all clean lines and muted colors. He didn't rush me. He listened. When I finished, he nodded once and asked, "Do you want protection or do you want answers?" "Both," I said. He ran a background check that went far beyond Google and gossip. Bank filings, liens, shell companies. By the time he slid the folder across his desk, my stomach felt hollow. My parents weren't wealthy. They were pretending. The house was leveraged to the edge. The boat was financed with brutal terms. Late notices sat unopened. My sister's business was bleeding money so fast it barely qualified as a hobby. Everything they had was balanced on borrowed confidence and unpaid bills. They hadn't refused me $5,000 because they didn't have it. They refused because admitting they needed it would have cracked the illusion. The silence inside me sharpened into something deliberate. We formed a company with a forgettable name and clean paperwork. Through intermediaries, we approached their lenders. Distressed debt sells cheap when banks want tidy books. I bought what my parents owed for less than it was worth, signatures stacking quietly while my knee learned how to bend again. Overnight, nothing looked different to them. They kept hosting dinners, posting champagne photos. My sister captioned her life with words like abundance and manifestation, never realizing the house she posed in wasn't really hers anymore. The intermediary invited them to lunch at a private club, offered relief, a sale and leaseback. No foreclosure. No embarrassment. Buried in the contract was one clause sharp enough to end everything. One late payment. They didn't read it. They signed, smiling. The weeks that followed were surreal. My parents walked lighter, laughed louder, and started spending again like the danger had passed. My mother hosted friends in the living room, pouring wine she couldn't afford, bragging about how smart planning had saved them. My father stood taller, convinced he'd outmaneuvered a system he never bothered to understand. I watched from a distance, healing my knee, relearning how to run, waiting. I didn't interfere. I didn't rush. People who live on illusions always trip eventually. You just have to let them walk far enough. The payment schedule was clear. The date was circled in my calendar with military precision. Midnight mattered. 1 minute mattered. The night it happened, I couldn't sleep. Not from nerves, clarity. At 11:58 p.m., I checked the account, nothing. At 11:59, still nothing. I imagined my father at the kitchen table, confident, telling my mother it had gone through. I imagined him waving her off. He always waved people off. At 12:01 a.m., the lease terminated. The system timestamp didn't hesitate. Neither did I. By morning, the intermediary called them for a compliance meeting. My parents arrived irritated and late, demanding coffee, demanding answers. My father snapped, "Where's the senior partner?" We were promised discretion. I was already there. I turned my chair slowly, my knee steady beneath me, no brace, no crutch. My sister's smile collapsed first. My mother's face drained of color. My father just stared, mouth opening and closing, trying to find a version of reality where I didn't exist in that seat. "Hello," I said calmly. "I'll be handling this." "You tricked us," my father hissed, anger finally breaking through fear. "No," I replied, sliding the signed pages across the table. "You signed." He leaned back, cornered, and did what he always did when power slipped. He bragged. Hidden accounts. Offshore money. Connections that made him untouchable. I let him finish. Then I placed the final document on the table. "I reported that weeks ago," I said softly. The room went silent. My father's face changed in stages. First disbelief, then calculation, then the slow, unmistakable collapse of certainty. He looked at my mother like she might rescue him, like she always had. She didn't speak. She couldn't. Her hands were shaking too badly. "You wouldn't," he said finally, voice low, almost pleading. "I'm your father." I felt that sentence land in my chest, bounce once, and fall flat. Titles only matter when they're honored. He'd spent years teaching me that lesson without realizing it. "I already did," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The documents did the talking now. The lease terminated at 12:01. Notices are already processed. My sister found her voice then. "This is insane," she snapped. "You can't just take our house." "Our?" I echoed softly. "You never paid for it." Security appeared at the door, polite but firm. The meeting ended the way most illusions do, abruptly, without ceremony. As I stood, my knee held, strong, stable, a quiet victory no one else noticed. By the time they reached the house, the notice was already taped to the front door. Clean paper. Clean ink. No yelling, no scene. Just facts. I didn't go with them. I didn't watch. Instead, I drove across town to Beckett's shop. The sign out front was faded, one letter flickering like it had given up trying. Inside, the place smelled like oil and metal and honesty. He looked up from an engine when I walked in, eyes going wide when he saw me standing unassisted. "You're walking," he said. "Yeah," I replied, "I am." I handed him a folder. Deed, transfer papers, paid in full. "What's this?" he asked, already knowing. "I bought your shop," I said. "You sold your tools for me. I'm giving them back with interest." He tried to argue. He always did. But his voice cracked halfway through, and he pulled me into a hug that smelled like grease and safety. That night, I went home to my quiet apartment, sat down carefully, and breathed. For the first time since the phone call from the clinic, my body felt like it belonged to me again. The silence returned, but this time it was peaceful. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It crept in through voicemails and missed calls, through texts that shifted tone every few hours, rage, denial, bargaining, grief. I didn't answer any of them. Silence had always been their weapon. I was simply fluent now. My parents tried lawyers first, expensive ones, the kind that promise miracles and deliver invoices. Nothing stuck. Contracts don't care about family titles. Deadlines don't bend for nostalgia. Every path they tried circled back to the same truth, sharp and unavoidable. They had signed. They had defaulted. They had lost. My sister blasted me online for a while. Long posts about betrayal, about toxic ambition. She left out the part where she laughed. When my leg broke. Strangers defended her. Strangers always do. I didn't respond. I watched her followers drift away when the champagne photo stopped and the house disappeared from her background. Beckett's shop changed fast. New sign, new equipment. He hired back 2 guys he'd let go during slow months. Every time I stopped by, he made a point of wiping his hands before hugging me, like I was something fragile and valuable. Maybe I was. Rehab was brutal, painful, humbling, but every step forward felt earned. I ran for the first time on a cool morning, breath burning, knee steady beneath me. I laughed out loud when it happened, alone, unafraid. Months later, I ran into my parents by accident at a grocery store across town. Smaller carts, cheaper brands. My mother looked older. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. No words passed between us. We didn't need them. I realized then that revenge wasn't loud. It didn't need witnesses or speeches. It just needed patience and paperwork. I didn't take their house to punish them. I took it to remind myself of something I'd almost forgotten, that my life had value even when they pretended it didn't. That my body was worth saving. That the silence I'd learned to survive in could also be a place of strength. Time did what time always does. It settled the dust and exposed what was real underneath. I finished rehab and re-enlisted with a waiver, the kind you only get when a surgeon is willing to put their reputation on the line. The first day back in uniform, I stood in front of the mirror longer than necessary, adjusting the fabric over my knee, testing my weight, my balance. I wasn't the same soldier I'd been before the injury. I was sharper, quieter, harder to corner. Money stopped feeling like a threat and started feeling like a tool. The lawyer set up trusts and walls and safeguards I didn't know existed before this. I learned how people hide things, and more importantly, how they lose them. Knowledge changed me in ways pain never could. Beckett thrived. The shop became his again in spirit, not just on paper. He stopped flinching every time rent was due. He started planning, expanding. Once, while we ate takeout on overturned buckets in the back, he said, "You know they'll never forgive you." I shrugged. "They never forgave me for needing help." He nodded. That was the end of it. I didn't hear from my parents for almost a year. When I did, it was a letter, handwritten, no return address. My mother apologized without naming specifics. My father didn't sign it. I folded the page carefully and placed it in a drawer, not out of sentiment but closure. Some things don't need answers. They just need endings. On a crisp fall morning, I ran a full mile without stopping. No limp, no fear. My knee held firm, muscle and metal working together like they'd made peace. I stood there afterward, hands on my hips, heart pounding, and felt something settle deep in my chest. I hadn't just survived the moment they dismissed me. I had outgrown it, And for the first time, I wasn't defined by what my family took from me, but by what I chose to build after. The last thing I did was sell the boat. Not out of spite. Not dramatically. Just efficiently. The broker handled it in 3 phone calls and 1 quiet signature. When the funds cleared, I paid off the remainder of my loan, closed the account and shredded the paperwork. The debt that had once owned my future disappeared without ceremony. I stood on the pier the day it left the marina. No speeches. No confrontation. Just water slapping against wood and a vessel drifting away, lighter without pretending it was something more than it was. I watched until it became a dot, then nothing at all. That night, I cooked dinner in my apartment and ate slowly. No painkillers. No anxiety buzzing under my skin. I texted Beckett about a new lift he wanted for the shop and sent the money before he could talk. Himself out of asking. He replied with a photo of the crew grinning like kids. It felt right. Weeks later, I received confirmation that the offshore accounts my father bragged about were frozen pending investigation. I didn't feel triumph. I felt finished. Some chapters don't need a reaction. They just need to close. I still wear the uniform. I still train. I still feel the metal in my knee on cold mornings. A quiet reminder of the week my life split in 2. But when I run now, my stride is even. My breath is steady. My body answers when I ask it to move. My parents exist somewhere beyond my daily orbit. My sister, too. They don't get updates. They don't get access. They don't get explanations. Not because I'm angry, but because I'm done negotiating my worth. I learned something permanent from the moment my father chose a boat over my leg. People will tell you exactly who you are to them. Believe them the first time. I saved my body. I protected my future. And I walked away on my own 2 legs without looking back.